Iron Man has had a somewhat odd history in video games. His first appearance was in a standard arcade beat-em-up known as Captain America and the Avengers. A few years later, he'd be part of the roster for Capcom's Marvel Superheroes, an arcade hit that would eventually spawn the all-time classic Marvel vs. Capcom. But then, already very early on in his video game career, Iron Man would find himself in a bizarre crossover with a Valiant Comics character in Iron Man / XO Manowar in Heavy Metal. God, what a weird title. I've never actually played this game myself, but the footage I've seen of it certainly hasn't inspired me to do so. The visuals are downright ugly, it looks like the type of beat 'em up to have terrible hit detection, and I just don't care at all for this XO Manowar character. Of course, Iron Man would find himself in a ton of ensemble titles like Marvel Superheroes War of the Gems and Marvel Ultimate Alliance. He'd also get one hell of an underrated GBA game and appear in a bunch of fighting games. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Camouflage's excellent Iron Man VR, a game that, as cliche as it sounds, truly makes you feel like you stepped into one of Tony's prized suits. It wouldn't be until he had his big cinematic breakthrough that he'd get a proper single-player console game. Unfortunately, Iron Man and its sequel, Iron Man 2, came out to middling reviews and weren't the surprise gems like the Star-Spangled Man with a Plan happened to receive. Yeah, the Iron Man video game formula has yet to be nailed down. But for what it's worth, I think the two movie tie-in games have a decent foundation. I think their flight controls are serviceable. They just need a little something extra to really make it feel like you're tearing through the sky. And to give credit where credit is due, I think Iron Man's combat in Marvel's Avengers feels really good. Not only do you have a decent arsenal consisting of your repulsor blasts, missiles, and lasers, but his hand-to-hand combat also feels really impactful. Much like how Marvel's Spider-Man took elements that worked from Beanox's games and refined them to a point where they really came together, I think EA's upcoming Iron Man game has a good selection of titles to pull inspiration from to truly deliver on the ultimate Iron Man experience. But if you've been around here long enough, you know that I'm not here to talk about big fancy AAA console games. I'm more interested in the versions that no one talks about. The ones that history wants to snatch out of your hands and chuck at a wall, hoping that you forget they ever existed. That's right, I'm talking about Gameloft's long-delisted Iron Man 2 movie tie-in game exclusive to iOS devices. I've been covering delisted mobile games for a bit now, and almost every time I go download one, I have to jump through a bunch of hoops to get them up and running. They often come with missing files that you have to download from sketchy websites, they can be incompatible with modern devices, or you may not be able to play them due to it requiring some sort of online component whose servers are no longer active. I've been fortunate enough to find workarounds for the examples I just mentioned, but something that has been completely off the table until now is downloading delisted mobile games that were exclusive to iOS devices. While Android emulation has been around for a while now, emulating Apple devices has only recently been cracked. This is incredibly exciting for me because I've kind of carved myself a very specific gaming niche with these mobile games, and it looks like the horizon has been expanded exponentially. While iOS emulation is still very much in its infancy and isn't in the most stable state, as many games are still incompatible with the emulator known as Touch HLE, luckily, Iron Man 2 is fully playable. This is a game that I thought would forever be lost to history and that I would never be able to play it. Unless I was crazy enough to track down an old iPhone or iPad that already has it installed, but I don't even want to know how much one of those things would go for on eBay. But here we are. iOS emulation is ironically more stable on Android devices than it is on PC, at least from my experience. So I got myself a cheap Android device from Amazon, and I'll be playing Iron Man 2 with its intended touch controls, as opposed to what I usually do, which is playing the game through emulation and mapping the on-screen touch controls to a controller. And if I were to be using a controller, I'd be using the Supernova multi-platform game controller from Gamester. Have you ever dropped like 80 friggin' dollars on one of those first-party controllers only for them to crap out on you with stick drift just a few months later? I know I have. Like 3 times actually, and I swear I treat my controllers with love and care. With Gamester's Supernova controller, you'll never have to worry about the dreaded stick drift because they use Hall effect joysticks. These kinds of joysticks use magnetic fields and sensors to minimize friction and wear and tear, thus making your controller last a lifetime. You've also got other nifty features like the 2-stage triggers that allow you to change the distance your trigger travels for faster response or more control, and 2 mappable back buttons for you sweats out there. These controllers also offer customization to fit your style with easily swappable magnetic faceplates and RGB lighting that you can change through Gamester's dedicated app. Not only do you get a controller with a bunch of features, it also comes with its own charging dock. All this for a price that doesn't ask for an arm and a leg. So use my affiliate link down below to get yourself a reliable controller. But anyway, with that being said, Jarvis, boot up Iron Man 2 for iOS and stroke it a little. Our adventure begins at the Stark Expo, where Tony is unveiling his new suitcase armor. It's pretty funny seeing the opening scene from Iron Man 2 adapted here because clearly the iPhone's capabilities from back then didn't allow for many NPCs to be dropped in. While the movie has this massive gathering of cheering and hollering fans as Tony lands center stage, the mobile game has a crowd of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. I just know that's gotta be a massive blow to Tony's ego. An interesting fact is that while the main console version of Iron Man 2 tells a unique story different from the movie, Iron Man 2 on mobile is an adaptation of the movie's plot, albeit a very loose adaptation as you'll come to see. Anyway, during the middle of Tony's presentation, Jarvis detects an explosion nearby, and we take control of Tony to see who's behind all the ruckus. Controlling old Shellhead feels pretty good. Like I said before, I usually play these mobile games with an actual controller for a more console-like experience, but the touch controls here were never an issue. Iron Man's run cycle is really fast and he would always move where I intended him to. I never found myself struggling with controls due to unresponsiveness or inaccuracy. After clearing some debris, we run into our first group of enemies in the form of these robots. Our main way of attacking is using Iron Man's iconic repulsor blast, and they are quite generous with their targeting system. Using them merely requires the player to hold down this fire button, and enemies won't stand a chance as they melt away. Sometimes it seems like enemies don't even have to be in my line of sight in order for Tony to lock the targeting reticle onto them and fire away. Pair that with how easily and swiftly you can strafe around while shooting, and you will truly become the invincible Iron Man. Holding down the fire button has Tony charge up his Unibeam attack, but I hardly found myself ever using it. A fully charged Unibeam does do a decent amount of damage, but it leaves you open to attacks as you stand there waiting for the meter to fill up. I found that the time I'd spend waiting for the Unibeam to charge up could just go to me pouring repulsor blasts to the enemy, and I'd probably take them out sooner that way anyway. Honestly, the main reason I used the Unibeam every now and then was just for the sake of variety. You can also pick up objects in the environment like vending machines to check out enemies, but also kind of a useless ability. Continuing along, I run into one of Tony's classic Iron Man helmets. Jesus, this guy's careless just leaving those things lying around anywhere. Don't act surprised when some competitor ends up using stolen Stark tech to develop their own suits. These are your collectibles for this endeavor, granting you extra XP points for each one you collect. I'm glad that they have the classic red and yellow color scheme because it makes them super easy to spot from a distance. They're never tucked away in a super obscure hiding spot. Even at some of the later levels that are more open, they always seem to be conveniently placed in a spot that you're supposed to go in anyway. Like, yeah, sometimes you'll find one just slightly off the beaten path, but let's just say you certainly wouldn't need a guide if you want to 100% this game. After rescuing a few civilians trapped underneath some debris, Jarvis advises us that our suit's missile firing capabilities are ready to be used, thus introducing us to our next attack move. Firing missiles works a little differently. It doesn't have a dedicated button. Instead, you have to tap on the enemies themselves to fire a missile at them. I think this is a clever way of avoiding cluttering the screen with a bunch of buttons, and it does feel intuitive. Missiles do indeed inflict a bit more damage than your repulsor blast, but they also have a cooldown after each usage, naturally. But again, the missiles just pale in comparisons to the repulsor blast. This is actually my biggest issue with the game. Ultimately, combat ends up feeling kind of stale because the repulsor blasts are too effective, to the point where it makes every other weapon in your arsenal completely obsolete. Their rate of fire, damage output, and lock-on aiming system are so overpowered that there's never really any reason to use any other attack. In between missions, you can level up suit components like your health, your weapons, and even unlock combos for hand-to-hand combat. But even then, the fully upgraded unibeam or missiles are still no match for the repulsor blast. I did appreciate that they included hand-to-hand combat. I feel like that can be something that has the potential to be overlooked in an Iron Man game, since, I don't know, I guess when I think about the way Iron Man fights, I tend to picture him using his suit's weapons as opposed to old-fashioned fisticuffs. But no, he does indeed throw down. And the combos you can do here have some pretty cool animations and also do a fair bit of damage, but when you're surrounded by multiple enemies, focusing on punching just one guy leaves you open to attacks from the others. So again, it's back to the old trusty run and gun tactic with the repulsor blasts. Once we're through clearing out some of the uninvited guests, Jarvis detects the bomb that caused the explosion and informs us that there are still more active ones in the area. So we track him down, and of course it's not a superhero game without a bomb defusal minigame that you'll come across many times throughout the campaign. The one here isn't anything offensive or tedious though, it's pretty straightforward. We have to assemble an arc reactor by rotating the scattered pieces in this grid within the given time limit, and you also have a limited amount of moves you can make before the bomb explodes. I never once failed any of these, and I do wish they were a bit more unforgiving with the amount of moves you're given, or give us a shorter time limit for the sake of feeling some pressure. After defusing all 3 bombs, we clean up some stragglers, and unfortunately we don't find out who is behind the attack, and some of the robots manage to escape and are heading toward the city. The next level takes us to Manhattan and switches lanes drastically from the last one. This stage opens up quite significantly and we get a pseudo open world experience. Tony shows up in his classic Mark III? Or is this Mark IV? I don't know, I can never keep track of those. Anyway, we're introduced to this game's flight controls, and I gotta say, I'm impressed. Flight in video games is something that can easily feel finicky, let alone in a mobile game with touch controls. But they pulled it off quite nicely here. A new button is added to your UI for taking off, and you drag that button up or down to ascend and descend respectively. Holding down that same button will switch you from hover mode to flight mode, and you simply steer around with the virtual stick on the left side of the screen. This feels great. They struck a perfect speed that's not so fast so it allows you to control Iron Man easily, while also not feeling too slow so it doesn't feel boring to fly around. Although there's not much to do here besides enjoying the low poly architecture and awful poppin', it's pretty cool to have a small slice of Manhattan to fly around in, as there's never been an open world Iron Man game at this time. So right now, this is the closest you can get. Making our way downtown, we face off against more advanced humanoid drones that have been firing upon helpless citizens. I love these guys' design. Even though they're just, more robots, I find them infinitely more interesting to fight than a generic drone or spider-like looking robot. This level has us fly around rampantly throughout the city as we defend a helicopter from robots, rescue civilians from robots, and of course, defuse more bombs. After scratching those errands off our list, we get an incoming transmission from the one and only Nick Fury, who lets us know that a piece of cargo has been stolen by a baddie known as firepower. Now, I gotta be honest, I'm not well versed in Iron Man villains. I mean, I know a few like the Mandarin, Crimson Dynamo, Living Laser, Whiskey, so it's cool to be introduced to a new face through this obscure little mobile game. So we fly off to Times Square to confront the big guy and jump into our first boss fight of the game. I love the way the camera pulls back during the boss fight, giving us a good sense of scale for firepower and doing a good job of always keeping him in view so you can easily target him as you circle strafe him. The boss fight itself is pretty straightforward. You gotta target his arms until you blow them off, thus leaving him stunned for a few seconds, where you'll then be able to target his center mass. But he does materialize new arms before you know it, and then you just do it all over again. Like I've expressed before about other enemies, using the repulsor blast is the best way to take him out. With firepower out for the count, Tony takes a closer look at his armor and notices that it's using Stark technology. See what I'm saying? You should have known better than leaving those helmets just lying around. Suspecting one of his competitors, Justin Hammer, to be behind this, he dials him up and we're treated to, honestly, a pretty decent Sam Rockwell impression.
Come on, that's insulting!
To speak on the voice acting as a whole, I think everyone does a pretty good job. Unfortunately, we don't get any of the cast members of the movie reprising their roles, but everyone here is more than serviceable. The voice actor filling in for Don Cheadle especially sounds really close to his on-screen counterpart.
What can I do?
What they pay you to do. You are getting paid for this, right?
Shut up.
Well shit, of course. It's the legendary Phil Lamar voicing him. I think it's really commendable just how much voice-acted dialogue there is in the game. Not only do you have voice performances for the cutscenes, but each mission also has a briefing that's read out loud by Jarvis. They could have just kept this as a text box and called it a day, but it's awesome that they went that extra mile. Our next mission has us traveling to Mogadishu, where warlords are keeping UN inspectors hostage. And for this mission, Tony is rocking this badass stealth suit, as this mission has some very light stealth elements. A stealth mission where I have to rescue hostages in the deep jungle.
It's the virtuous mission all over again.
Well, this mission certainly doesn't require the stealth mastery of someone like Snake, because it leaves a lot to be desired. The only thing you have to circumvent are these towers that scan the area with infrared beams. You have a dedicated button that allows you to see these beams, and it also puts this cool CRT filter on your screen. Avoiding these beams is a total cakewalk. I wish they had put other types of obstacles you have to avoid, like a laser grid, maybe some infrared beams that behave differently, like circles that move in a particular pattern on the ground. This is all very basic stuff that we've seen a ton of times in platformers and the like, so I'm not at all suggesting some mind-blowing tricks this game should have implemented, but I can't help but feel like they could have made this supposed stealth level stand out a bit more. They do also apply some limitations, like Iron Man not being able to fly up to a certain height without getting detected by the area security system, and I thought that was really clever. Maybe they could have applied more limitations, like not being able to use certain weapons because they're too loud, forcing Tony to only use hand-to-hand combat. Although I can't imagine that would be much quieter.
What was that noise?
Tracking deeper into the jungle, we find where the hostages are being held, and Tony uses his 5 killstreak Predator missile to take out some of the robots and watchtowers in the area. I thought this little minigame was neat. It actually does function a lot like one of those kill streaks from Call of Duty. It's those brief little one-off minigames and gimmicks that make these experiences so charming to me. Unfortunately, by the time we get to the hostages, the warlord responsible has already escaped. But Jarvis detects containers nearby that could be holding stolen Stark tech. So we check him out, and the game uses this opportunity to implement the oh so desirable bomb defusal minigame, even though there's no mention of any bombs. I mean, I guess it would make sense for the warlord to booby trap these. We do find an invoice for Stark tech in one of the containers from Roxxon. Comic fans will recognize the name as one of Marvel's massive conglomerates that have been tied to shady businesses, and they're very fitting in an Iron Man video game, as they're a corporation that specializes with oil refinement, product manufacturing, all that bigwig stuff that eventually leads to morally questionable dealings. Tony tracks down the shipping address in the invoice and finds out that it leads to a Roxxon oil rig, but he's not going to be able to make it there on time and calls Rhodey for an assist. I didn't even consider that Rhodey would be a playable character in this game, but here he is. To be frank, he functions exactly the same as Tony, but still, it's pretty cool to have him be playable here, and the visual difference is enough for me. And even though the mechanics are the same, the visual effects for his main attack clearly shows that he's firing bullets and not energy blasts. We find him in the middle of a war-torn village fighting off drones and tanks as he defends the locals. This is the only mission that actually gave me a fair bit of trouble. After fighting off some enemies, you find a dude that you're supposed to escort across town. He kept dying on me because I couldn't fight off the groups of enemies that spawn in on time. I must have failed this bit at least 3 or 4 times. I tried utilizing everything. The missiles, unibeam, the melee attacks, none of it was enough. This poor bastard kept getting obliterated and would seemingly never be able to reunite with his family again. That is, until I fell back on old reliable. Yep, the old strafe and repulsor, well, in this case, strafe and machine gun tactic. It seems that running around as you shoot enemies aggroes them more effectively in this particular section, drawing the attention away from the helpless civilian. Once we successfully escort the dude back, another dude that looks and is dressed exactly like the other dude asks us to fetch his car from across town so he can escape the city. I just want to take this moment to say that even though this has been a fairly simple video game, there aren't any mind-blowing mechanics here or anything that breaks the mold in terms of game design, I feel that it has been providing a fairly entertaining experience with very little. Levels are linear for the most part and aren't the most expansive areas I've experienced, but including small varied objectives like this really does make the most out of what's kind of a rudimentary experience. I don't mean that as a way to demean the game. There's only so much you could do on a smartphone at the time this game came out. Not to mention the extremely short development cycle these movie tie-in games were restricted to. Despite all that, getting to play this game after it's been inaccessible for so long is a massive treat. It feels like opening a time capsule to a bygone era. Not only are movie tie-in games already a niche within gaming itself, but movie tie-in mobile games that have been delisted is a layer deeper into this niche that felt impossible to experience today. All this to say that game preservation is important, man. Anyway.
Boom. You looking for this? Thank you, armored person! I'm getting out of here!
That heartless bastard! How can he just take off solo like that? He had more than enough room to take the rest of the folk here. What was that, a Hummer? How many people does one of those fit? 5 people, and there's only like... Oh shit. Yeah, well, karma's a bitch, buddy. Here we have a mini-boss that plays pretty much identically to the one against Firepower. I would have found this disappointing as it is so derivative of the last boss, but as we'll go on to see, it's actually not the main boss of this level. We're then treated to another open world-esque area where we fly around this city destroying any leftover weapons. The main bad guy for this level is this talented dancer known as Killer Shrike. I love this dude's design. I think an easy trap to fall into when adapting Iron Man villains into a video game based around the MCU is to make them just be a dude that dons a big chunky suit of armor. But Killer Shrike here has a very trim design with a distinct color palette. The exposed mouth goes a long way in making him stand out and does a good job of evoking the cowl his comic book counterpart wears. The elongated part of his helmet that reaches back looks to be a stand-in for his ponytail, and of course there's his signature wrist talon things. It's a good design, I think. As for his boss fight, it's unfortunately another one that falls short. Once again, all I had to do was run around and shoot him. I think it would have been cool if Killer Shrike was somehow immune to your projectile-based attacks, and the fight was more based around hand-to-hand combat. Mainly because of the way he moves. There's something about it that makes him look like he's a proficient dancer with the way he spins around and strikes these extravagant poses. Pairing such a fluid way of moving with his wrist-mounted talons, I think could have made for a really cool fighting style for a villain to have. So he easily bites the dust, but has no significant intel to give us as to who hired him. The next mission takes us underwater to an area with high levels of radiation that's apparently coming from mechs being powered by Stark Tech. So it's up to us to destroy it. See, now this is what I'm here for. I thought that the stealth armor would be as far as we go, but no, we also get this toyetic ass underwater Iron Man suit. This thing looks so good. I love the extra bulky design and the glass dome over the head. Like I said, it's just the type of thing you'd see in tie-in movie action figures, despite this armor not ever appearing in the movie. This level also switches things up by being an on-rails shooting section. I think it works well. Iron Man still automatically targets enemies as he does in normal levels, and you also have to dodge obstacles like debris and these big underwater mines. It all controls fairly well and acted as a nice change of pace. This is also where we hear from Black Widow for the first time, and interestingly enough, she has a Russian accent.
Good. Keep visual contact.
Which I think makes this the only version of MCU's Black Widow that indeed has a Russian accent. I looked up a cutscene of the Iron Man 2 console game that features Black Widow, and she had an American accent. So unless there's some other obscure thing that I don't know about, I think this makes this the only version of Black Widow. Hold your horses there. Hey there, future editing version of me here. There's actually a flashback scene in the Black Widow movie where Natasha is on an assassination mission, and you can hear that she has a Russian accent here. She's kind of whispering, so it's not impossible to miss.
His guard is pulling up now.
Still, I wonder if this game was developed early enough that Marvel wasn't sure whether they were gonna have ScarJo do a Russian accent or not. Or maybe Gameloft just assumed that she was gonna have a Russian accent and wasn't given the memo. Either way, I'm glad she has one here because it makes for a fun little tangent to go on for far too long in a YouTube video, so back to it. Eventually, we reach an underwater base housing a whale-shaped submarine that the arms dealer behind all this is using to get away. So we shoot it down, but the slippery bastard manages to get away again. In the next mission, we finally face off against the main antagonist of the movie, Ivan Vanko, aka Whiplash. And we run into an interesting situation again, because if you remember, Whiplash was also featured as a boss character in the 2008 Iron Man video game. Luckily, the mantle of Whiplash is one that's been held by multiple characters, and the Whiplash found in the first Iron Man game was the Mark Scarlatti version of the character. So that's an easy out to explain why we're fighting Whiplash again in this game. Not that this game would be very concerned with continuity. I also think we have another instance here of this mobile game having a unique aspect, because I think this would make this the only appearance of the Ivan Vanko version of Whiplash that appears in a video game. Oh, wait, no, hold your horses again. Hey, future editing version of me here. He's actually in Marvel Future Fight as a full-on playable character, no less. Man, I gotta tell you, that game is thorough. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the Marvel game that has the most robust roster of playable Marvel characters, rivaled by, I don't know, Lego Marvel superheroes. Does that one also maybe have Whiplash? I wouldn't be surprised. Back to it. His boss fight sucks too, by the way. I was done with it in seconds. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that at this point of the game, you can choose whether you want to play as Iron Man or War Machine for most missions. And there are some slight dialogue differences depending on who you're playing as. For War Machine, any dialogue that would be delivered by Jarvis when playing as Tony is instead delivered by Black Widow. Tony and Rhodey also swap places in cutscenes to be like the lead guy. when you're playing as them. And this next mission is a standout in that regard because whoever you're not playing as, their suit gets hacked and they lose control of it and start attacking the other hero, thus becoming a boss character. I thought this was an awesome idea, but unfortunately the game absolutely fumbles because it's incapable of having a compelling or even slightly challenging boss fight. Yep, you guessed it, just run and shoot. There's a moment in this fight where Tony or Rhodey, again depending on who you're playing as, goes, "Oh, you gotta manually reboot my suit," or something like that. And I thought the game was gonna present that hacking minigame in the middle of the boss fight. And even though I had done that minigame a ton of times by this point, shit, I would have taken it just to have something interesting in this fight. Maybe you have to incapacitate your opponent and then, the minigame is presented to you. But the first time you knock him out, it only gives you a very limited amount of time to hack their suit. Maybe not even enough to give you a chance at even beating the hacking minigame. But every time you knock them out, the time they give you keeps increasing, giving you a bigger window to successfully hack their suit. But no, there's nothing here like that. It's just done in a cutscene and the boss fight is over. The next mission is another on-rails shooting section, but this time we take to the skies. This level adds a neat little QTE where you counter missile attacks from enemies by grabbing them out of the air and tossing it back at them. I thought that was pretty badass. At this point, Hammer reveals himself to be the culprit and is holding Pepper Potts hostage, threatening to use a particle accelerator on her. Jesus. Over at the Shield helicarrier, someone is leading an attack, and it's none other than Crimson Dynamo, with not a whole lot of crimson on his armor. This is a character that has had a bunch of different people take up on the title. If you remember, Ivan Vanko in the Iron Man 2 movie was sort of a hybrid of Whiplash and Crimson Dynamo. They don't bother specifying who it is inside the suit here, they simply refer to him as Crimson Dynamo, which is totally fine by me. This boss fight is actually totally different from all the rest. It retains the on-rails gameplay style from the previous level, having Dynamo in the background as he attacks you with different moves that can be pretty tough to read. These wide sweeping lasers got me a bunch of times. I think I died at least 4 times. This is actually like the only boss fight that has an attack pattern you have to pick up on and doesn't just have you mindlessly holding down the shoot button as you witness your opponent's health bar just absolutely melt before you. It made me wish that more bosses were set up with this on-rails gameplay style, each having a unique attack pattern that gets more complex and fast-paced as the fight goes on. Dynamo will occasionally lunge forward to attack you with a big ol' punch, and dodging it 3 times consecutively will temporarily stun him, and this will give you an opportunity to counter him with a QTE that does significant damage. I eventually found that shooting missiles at him will force him to do this punch attack, thus giving me the opportunity to stun him more frequently, and well, it kind of broke the boss fight for me and made it trivial. But even with that, it's still by far the best boss fight in the game. It even has a second phase where it also plays exactly like the on-rails flight section we just did in the previous level, and even though it doesn't add anything new that we haven't done before, I thought it was a nice change in visuals and a cool way to switch up the fight. After defeating Crimson Dynamo, we finally pinpoint Hammer's location. Turns out he's been using us the whole time by having us destroy the stolen tech he sold to his competitors. And Hammer used the profits to fund his ultimate weapon, Ultimo. Okay, even for a game on a mobile phone with low poly graphics, blurry textures, and janky animations, the scale of this fight is pretty cool. Ultimo towers over everything surrounding him. He looks awesome, which makes it all the more painful that this is yet another boss fight that is so simple and underwhelming in its design. All you have to do is shoot at his big ol' head, which by now your repulsor blast should be fully upgraded, so they'll make quick work of bringing down his health. Once he's knocked down, you fly over to the back of his neck, well, you'll be presented with a QTE. Once you're done with that, you'll have to take out a couple enemies, then repeat the same cycle against Ultimo. And then you're donezo. Man, I feel like there's so much more they could have done with this fight. Just spitballing here, I think back to the fight against the giant Mysterio in Neversoft Spider-Man, where you have to take out a bunch of those little glowing bits on his knees, waist, and chest. They could have just copied that design or something similar to make the fight against Ultimo just last a little bit longer. While we were decommissioning Hammer's ultimate weapon, Rhodey was rescuing Pepper Potts, and that brings us to the conclusion of this armored adventure. Gameloft's Iron Man 2 mobile game is not particularly good, but it's not bad either. The pieces are there. The shooting mechanics are reliable and get the job done. There's a decent amount of weapons to cycle through, and even the melee combat has some cool animations. Your attacks are just not well balanced. There might as well be just one big button for shooting your repulsor blast and no wasted space for the other weapons that are rendered useless. I think the game does a good job of keeping the experience feeling fresh from a level design aspect. There's always a fun little gimmick being introduced in the next level, whether it be an on-rails section, a simple but amusing puzzle, or a shoddy stealth section. You can easily clear this game in about 2 hours, and that's all I really need for these kinds of games. The real treat is getting to experience it at all today, after it being 6 feet under for so long. And I look forward to playing more iOS games now that emulation for such devices has been figured out. So make sure to hit that subscribe button to be notified of the next game I'm covering. Special thanks to Sam, Carlos Fontes, and the Minor Prophet for supporting at the top tier. You guys are certified superheroes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.